Good evening. Good evening. I'm Douglas Druick, President, and Eloise W. Martin, Director of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all here to the museum this evening on what is a truly extraordinary occasion. Tonight, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Architecture and Design Society. We also remember our dear friend and generous benefactor, Harold Schiff, and we honor the outstanding achievements of another great friend and benefactor, architect Stanley Tigerman. In 1981, the Art Institute of Chicago established the Department of Architecture and its support group, the Architecture Society. In this way, it ensured the museum's commitment to the city's great architectural legacy and to the importance of architectural achievements worldwide. Over the years, both the department and the society that supports it expanded their scope to include design. Together, the department and society have worked closely and collaboratively to bring an extraordinary array of lectures, panel discussions, and behind-the-scenes tours of many of Chicago's greatest buildings, both to its many members as well as to the larger museum audience. Through the Society's critical support, we have acquired significant works of art for the collection and produced original and thought-provoking exhibitions and catalogs along with innovative public programming. In short, this has been a vital partnership that has greatly impacted both the museum and the Chicago community. We are ever grateful to the Architecture and Design Society and its members for their ongoing support and the critical contributions to the department's many accomplishments and successes. Tonight, we also pay tribute to one of our most ardent supporters, Harold Schiff. The Art Institute elected Harold to be a life trustee in 2007, recognizing his visionary leadership within the city and his extraordinary service and commitment to the museum and to the architectural education. Harold served as co-chair of the Architecture Committee for some 15 years and as a member for 26 years. He founded the Schiff Foundation Fellowship for Architecture, and he and his wife, Margot, endowed the striking Harold and Margot Schiff Gallery in the modern wing. Harold's passion and dedication were extraordinary, and we remember him as an invaluable advisor and close friend while we celebrate his enduring legacy. And now it's my great pleasure to turn this evening's discussion over to our co-host, WTTW's Geoffrey Baer, and to welcome this evening's honored guest, the immensely talented Stanley Tigerman. Stanley will be joined on stage by his colleagues and renowned architects Frank Gehry and Robert Stern, whom we are delighted to welcome here at the museum this evening. We honor Stanley tonight for his invaluable contributions to the field of architecture as a leader and progressive thinker, and for his fundamental support of the museum and the Department of Architecture and Design. Please join me in welcoming this evening's very special guests.
Hi, everybody. I have just a few quick introductory remarks, and then we will bring our guest of honor and the other architects out here. Thank goodness Stanley Tigerman has astigmatism. Because if he didn't have astigmatism, he would have become a Navy pilot for his career, and none of us would be here tonight celebrating his illustrious work. And even more importantly, our world would never have been blessed with his ingenious and provocative and socially important buildings and writings, and legions of young architects would never have benefited from his teaching and from his mentoring. So we're here to celebrate Stanley, but it's all in the service of supporting an organization that he has supported since its inception and that has been near and dear to his heart, the Architecture and Design Society. And as Douglas just pointed out, it's an organization that has worked hand in glove with the Department of Architecture and Design for 30 years now. So we're celebrating our 30th birthday. I'm proud to be a board member of the Architecture and Design Society, along with another board member, Stanley Tigerman's wife and partner, the architect Margaret McCurry. The founding of the Society was one of John Zukowski's top agenda items when he became the curator of the Department of Architecture when it was founded in 1981. And the wonderfully remarkable thing is that John is here tonight. John, where are you? There he is. John's original assistant curator, Pauline Saliga, is here, and the Society's founding president, Jim Alexander, is also here. So this is 30 years of history. And as a board member of the Society, I really want to also obviously point out that the curator who is now continuing the work of the department, and I dare say taking it to a new level, the spectacular Zoe Ryan is here. Along with her assistant curators, Allison Fisher and Karen Kreis. Let's hear it for them. So we thank them, and we thank the many board members and Society members and generous supporters, past and present, who have given so much to this Society. And obviously we thank you because you are here to help us with our important work of supporting the exhibitions, the wonderful tours that we've given. We had a tour of Aqua this year, led by Jeannie Gang. We've had wonderful lectures by Pritzker Prize winners over the years, and all of the other activities. And that is what you are here and helping to support tonight. And I know that Zoe and all of us on the board want to give a deep thanks to the board member who has devoted 25 hours a day for months to throwing this party, Modern Ball chairperson Bess Cook. Let's hear it for her. I was speaking to Bess on the phone the other day, and I said, "How's it going?" She said, "Well, you know, I have good days and bad days." And she said that she and her husband have taken, this is called the Modern Ball, she and her husband have taken to calling those mod swings. So let's get started. First, a disclaimer, because I'm from PBS. The following program will almost certainly contain content that will be inappropriate for younger or more sensitive viewers, especially if you don't like swearing. We invite you to eavesdrop on a conversation between three old and dear friends who just happen to be among the most famous and important architects in the world. Please welcome to the stage Robert A.M. Stern, Frank Gehry, and our honoree, Stanley Tigerman. I'll sit here.
Frank, you sit here. Oh, let Frank sit there.
Stanley's arranging the seating. I just have to do one brief thing here before we get started.
Here's a surprise. Who's out there? A referee's shirt.
That's why he wore that tie.
You need me to help you put that on.
I know. Well, he was criticizing me for my necktie earlier, so now you won't see it, Bob. So it's okay. That's better.
Compared to that.
I don't know if I'm going to wear this thing for the whole thing or not, but we'll see. I'll put this here just in case.
Are we going to have a fight?
That's my job to prevent
Yeah, okay.
that. I'm going to just introduce them very briefly. I mean, you all know who they are, but, you know, I'm the moderator, so I have to introduce. Frank Gehry began his career as a truck driver in L.A. Frank began his career as a truck driver in L.A. Fortunately, for all of us, he remembered that as a child he liked sitting on the floor with his grandmother and designing cities from scraps of wood that had been salvaged from the lumber yard. That led him to architecture school, where a professor told him this just wasn't the career for him. Is that true? Yeah. He persevered, and after an early career designing rather traditional modernist buildings, he jumped off the cliff, as he puts it, and started designing things he liked. That leap of faith led him to design the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, the Disney Concert Hall in LA, our own Pritzker Pavilion here in Chicago, and on and on and on. He is the 1998 winner of the Pritzker Prize, Frank Gehry. Robert A.M. Stern has more built work in Chicago than any other architect. All those bus shelters and street furniture and newsstand kiosks, it's all from Ramsey, Robert A.M. Stern Architects. He grew up in lower middle class Brooklyn, enthralled with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and the glamour of Manhattan. He would gaze at the New York skyline across the river and dream of adding to it. And how many of us really have our dreams come true? He grew up to do just that and much, much more. He's a prolific architect, describing himself as a modern traditionalist. His many books, Stanley told me, are measured by the pound. And he is the much praised dean of the Yale School of Architecture. He was honored with the Vincent Scully Prize in 2008 and the Driehaus Prize in 2011. Robert A.M. Stern. Stanley Tigerman, like that other famous Chicagoan Studs Terkel, was raised in a boarding house, at least partly, which was run by his grandparents. In his memoir, he paints a wonderfully Woody Allen-esque picture of those years. His grandfather preferred studying Talmud in his pajamas and playing pinochle rather than working. In one scene, he describes his grandmother chasing his grandfather around the kitchen with a knife as Stanley cowers under the kitchen table. But in his writings, Stanley has also revealed how his family and the parade of characters in the boarding house and the myriad people and experience in his life have fostered a deep interest in ethics and humanitarianism that runs through all of his work, both his design work, his teaching, and his prolific writing. Our curator, Zoe Ryan, will be telling you much more about Stanley later on in the evening, so I won't steal her thunder. Stanley Tigerman, our honoree. So I'd like to just get things started. I don't know how long I'm going to wear this ridiculous shirt, but I'm stuck with it now. So
Probably through dinner.
All through dinner, yeah, probably. Stanley, you and I met a little bit to sort of discuss this. This conversation, and I took a lot of notes. And we were talking about comparisons and contrasts between you. We have the East Coast and the Midwest and the West Coast. One of the things that you said was that in your view, you feel like Frank works from his gut, and Bob tends to work
big.
and Bob tends to work from his head. What body part do you work from?
Don't ask. You've done your homework, haven't you?
What do you guys think?
No comment.
No comment.
Absolutely.
All right. We'll start with a more straightforward question. You met Bob. You met Stanley when you both studied at Yale.
Right.
Under the formidable chair, Paul Rudolph. I interviewed Stanley about this about a year ago, and he said that you were the only student who had the chutzpah to call Mr. Rudolph Paul. What was Stanley like when you met him?
Well, he was thinner.
Oh, weren't we all?
But he wasn't so different from what he is today. I mean, he made a very strong impression, let's say. He worked very hard at his work, incredibly hard. And he was a leader of the class. I mean, he was there. You know how Stanley came to... Are we allowed to tell your story?
Of course.
I've got a few...
Stanley went to MIT. This is the official version. I don't know. There might be another version. But Stanley went to MIT and dropped out after the first year. Not really, as many kids are, not ready to take on the full responsibilities of a powerhouse place like MIT. And then he went into the Navy and and then he worked for architects, including Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, in Chicago, and he became a licensed architect, which you could then do without going to architecture school. You're no longer allowed to do that. I think that's a mistake. I think most people do better when they don't go to architecture school. But anyhow, he then felt he needed to get a little grooming, a little class, and he applied to a variety of architecture schools. Like IIT, they didn't answer his application, if I remember the story. Harvard said, yes, but you don't have a college degree, so you have to get one first, and then that will take 4 years or 3 years, and then we'll see, and whatever. And Yale Rudolph wrote him a letter, said, I think I'm going to regret this, but come and see me. And he eventually, and there are many versions of this story, as all stories that are good stories, they're worth telling 2 to 3 different ways. But one version has it that Stanley got on the train to New York that Paul Rudolph was taking to New York, probably having calculated, and stalked him onto the train. And by the time he got to New York, Rudolph said, okay, I'll do it. It was just easier than having to be badgered for the rest of the day. But Stanley got to do a Bachelor of Architecture in 1 year, and then a Master of Architecture in a second year. And in each case, he was a dazzling student in a firmament filled with very high-powered students in a very high-powered pressure cooker scene. Paul Rudolph was a killer teacher. Great architect, a great teacher who took no prisoners.
True.
It's all true.
It's all true. He got it. He did his homework.
No argument. The one thing you missed is you didn't tell the audience where his father was from.
Oh, my God. My father grew up in Chicago until he was 15.
All right.
Good.
So
And in my youth, we went and looked at all the old homesteads, which he could not quite remember where they were, but he'd say every now and then, yeah, I think that was where I lived, and so forth. So that's my recollection.
You know, this is a sidetrack based on that, though, but didn't you have some early Chicago exposure too, Frank?
My father drove me here once. We stayed at the YMCA, I remember, and we ate in a restaurant under the L, and I loved it. I remember loving the city, but I didn't know from architecture. I was 12 years old, I think.
Good.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Frank. In Stanley's memoir, which is called, by the way, Designing Bridges to Burn, again and again, Stanley, you talk about your short attention span. I should count up the number of times in there that you mention your short attention span, which you say has been both a liability and an asset in your career and in your personal life. Frank, you've known Stanley for many years. Does he have a short attention span? Do you see it that way?
No, not at all. Do you really?
Actually,
Yes.
except for old friends.
Oh, okay.
What's the
We
significance?
certainly put the short attention span to test today, Geoffrey.
Yes.
We've been locked in mortal conversation for 4 hours leading up to this.
Unbelievable.
Prisoners of Geoffrey.
It only feels like it. What do you make of that, the short attention span? What's that about?
Well, I mean, picking up on what Bob said, we've been sitting back there, what seems like for hours, in what is the longest study in perpetual foreplay to get this thing started.
No, but I think he's,
Go ahead.
I think he's very thorough. I've always found Stanley to get thoroughly involved with something, and I've always been impressed by that.
See it through to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
What-
I like it when he delivers manifestos. In the early days, that's what he used to do.
Go ahead.
I wanted him to do one tonight. Give us a quick one.
I manifestoed out.
What kind of manifestos? What do you mean?
Well, you know, we were all modernists, right? And then this thing happened and everybody went backwards and did postmodernism. And we were all
Except
caught.
I thought we were going forward.
Yeah. And we all got caught in this. There was this, where do you fit? What do you do? And we each chose our way. But Stanley was open and was searching. I never felt he was committed to any. I still don't. He's what do you call those guys? A chameleon.
Well, I don't
He
think
could
he has
go
a choice.
anywhere. He could go anywhere. He could put on any suit, play any role, but with great talent and I mean it wasn't just like the political thing that's going on now. where they all changed to become somebody. He wasn't doing that.
Duly noted editorial comment there.
I had to get that one.
Well, you know, you write about that, Stanley. In the memoir, you write about this lack of a signature style, you call it.
Yeah.
Right? I think both of you have undeniably a signature style, right?
Well, his drawings indicate a style, and that's what he does intuitively. So, and it has a lot of humor in it. It has a lot of humanism in it, and I've always found the ideas in it exciting as potential buildings. He didn't get to build a lot of it, but if you go and look through that, you could spend a lifetime exploring those ideas and come up.
But I think
Great.
without getting serious at the 13th hour, it seems to me that you owe it to a client and to yourself and to the unwitting buyer to try.
Right.
To continue the search and to continue the struggle.
Well, but it's Talmudic. You studied that.
Yeah, right. That's what it's about.
And Talmudic is why. That's when you're raised like that. And I think that we're all infected with that.
All three of you.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how Talmudic I am.
There
We
was
noticed
a time.
the loafers are still from Gucci. I got it. For sure.
There was a time, Bobby.
No, but I think each of us in our own way continues that struggle. When Bob took on the deanship at Yale, he had, even at that time, a very large practice, which is now much larger yet. But he took that very seriously and continues to. So he spent a huge amount of time. The majority of his time is spent in New Haven, period, which is one of the reasons I'm thrilled that he came as I am with you, Frank. But he took it seriously. It's beyond his buildings. I mean, and it was beyond what people think of him and his reputation. He took, yet alone that he's an alum of the institution, he took the job seriously. He's not a dean that rotates from job to job to job. It's a one-time operation, and he took it seriously and still does, albeit that he has this immense practice. So I think the struggle is what we, in our own way, and many, many others, do and what we're obligated to do. That's part of what you do when you take on being an architect, and yet alone an architectural educator. I think it's a struggle.
But I don't think Stanley has a short attention span either. I agree with Frank. He may think it's short because he doesn't know how short mine is or Frank's is. But I think he digs into an idea, but then he uses it up and goes on to the next thing. And one thing, he doesn't get in a rut. Many architects come out of the gate very early in their career and have some brilliant project, and everyone talks about them, and then they spend the rest of their lives talking about that project because they can never top themselves. There are even, well, at Yale, when I was a student, we had a teacher who, when he'd been at Harvard, his thesis was applauded by the faculty. He never got over it. Nobody applauded anything he'd ever done since. Extremely unhappy man. Stanley's not that guy. He moves on, takes his lickings, and goes forth. But I think you have a good enough attention span. You must. You wrote those books.
The pot calling the kettle black there, right?
Exactly. No, but we've known each other a very long time. Frank and I met 37 years ago when I was chairman of the AIA's Committee on Design. Bob and I know each other for 52 years.
And I met him that same time.
We met each other in 1974, at least that's when I remember our meeting, when a bunch of us East Coast people came west to UCLA. Remember, after the white and gray debate, Peter Eisenman and so forth? And we came out there.
But then, I didn't pay much attention to you then.
I didn't know who you were.
I know.
In fact, you weren't even really Frank Gehry then. You were still doing work for the Rouse Company.
Right.
That's right.
Right. But
I saw potential there.
But you saw potential. No, when I met Stanley at the AIA Design Committee, which was, I don't know what committee was designing, but we left that room in Washington. The conference was over, and we walked outside of the AIA headquarters, and I was standing next to Bob, right? And I had about 3 or 4 hours before my plane or my train. And you seemed to be looking for something new, and I said, I'm going to go over to the Corcoran to look at some art. And you said, yes, me too. And we walked through the collection, and I realized that he was very interested in contemporary art, and in fact knew a lot about it. And you don't find, in my life, I don't find a lot of architects like that are really looking at that stuff, especially at that time. And so, I just said, okay, he's a good guy.
He's not so bad after all.
Yeah.
No, actually, there was at that time, and even earlier, when we met over a half century ago, a kind of generosity of spirit where, Frank was the initial person that initially endowed the Tigerman McCurry Fellowship at Yale, where Bob and others would always invite us to be, regardless of whatever differences we had, to be on juries, to teach, to recommend us for projects. So there was that kind of generosity. So that's what stuck about that time.
But the generosity isn't about, it's about our professional understandings of each other that bonds us, I think, in the end. Because, we have a mutual friend, Peter Eisenman, right? Who is very perplexing, has been very perplexing to you and I. And we're like a couple of yentas. We call each other, and guess what Peter did today?
I have him on my faculty. I don't have to guess. He comes and tells me regularly.
But Peter was the erudite intellectual. He used long sentences and quoted from places that were important. And it took a while to realize what a fraud he was. And Stanley and I figured it out.
Well, it didn't take you long to figure out. I mean, he called every week for about 10 years saying at 7 in the morning, how come I haven't won the Pritzker Prize?
Oh, no, he has a new one now. He wants to win
the Driehaus.
Both the Pritzker Prize and the Driehaus Prize.
Right.
He wants to be the first person to do that.
He's here, by the way, sitting in the back.
I'm sure it can be worked out.
I'm sure that Cindy and Tom, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, he knows what we think. We all love him.
But Peter's a great architect.
There's no question.
And a great mind, and also, like these two gentlemen on my right, a great teacher. I mean, that is very important. We all three are very interested in education. And so I won't bang the drum about that, but these two guys are great teachers, as is Peter Eisenman. And their students remember the experience of studying with them. In the case of with Stanley, they remember the abuse. In the case of Peter, the psychodramas. In the case of Frank, he's really a nice man.
And you've had them all at Yale.
All the time. No, always.
Yeah, I go every other year, and a couple of years ago I told him I was getting too old and I wasn't going to come anymore, and I forgot I told him that. And then
This is a good story.
And then
the benefits of age.
The time to come, he didn't call me, and I thought maybe he's dumping me this year.
He called me up and said, "Why am I not here and being invited? Don't you like me anymore?" I said, "You told me you didn't want to come." Then I had a mad scramble around to find a little niche for him, but I did indeed.
I've interviewed, it's been really, really exciting for me over the last few years. I've gotten to interview a lot of you guys and a lot of other architects, and this conversation about Peter Eisenman is something that I've noticed that I kind of marvel at. You have this way of being
he's
able
our
to...
punching bag. We can always,
Yeah, but you do have a way of saying these things about each other, but there's obviously this deep affection that runs underneath it.
Oh boy, yeah.
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 Yep.
So
But I think
Next question.
10 yards.
I think if you look at our work, we're very different, right? So
Yeah.
what's interesting is that, you know, I really love these guys, and I feel it's mutual, and we respect each other, and we don't quibble about what we're doing. And I believe everything is done with sincerity and in the belief of doing something special for this profession that we're in. Mm-hmm. And so I think we share that. So we respect each other's work, and that's great. You don't find that very often.
Yeah.
I mean, this particular trio has been very loyal to each other over the years.
And helpful, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
For sure.
Well, another thing I was pondering was besides sartorial, I did want to talk about sartorial choices because, and if you don't know, Bob is always in yellow socks. Frank is almost always in a black T-shirt.
A very expensive black
A very
T-shirt.
expensive black. By whom?
Issei Miyake.
Okay. And
He sends them to me.
oh, another one. And you often wear it. Not tonight, but you're often in a red checked shirt, right? Is it red?
No, I don't have any red check shirts.
Well, a checked shirt.
No, I don't have any check shirts.
So do you? So
Stripes, but no check.
Okay, so well, then maybe this plays back into the signature style thing. So even in your sartorial choices,
Stanley always wears a blue blazer, unless he's changed recently, but a blue blazer and gray flannel trousers, and he always a proper tie, and he always looks a perfect little Yale man, which he is.
You're not here enough in Chicago to realize that I only wear a tie on the occasion of seeing you.
Oh, well, that's all that counts.
because ties matter a lot to him, as we saw backstage. He was critiquing the tie a lot backstage.
I was critiquing the fact that your button wasn't buttoned.
That's right.
We had
I was
four.
going to put this thing on. I was
We
also
had
thinking,
4 hours. What would we talk about?
Right.
4 hours.
But
It was about a half an hour, but it felt like 4
I think
hours.
the thing we share is interesting that Bob has been dean how many years?
15. This is my 15th year.
He brings everybody
Yes.
to the school. He doesn't have a central
More than that,
agenda.
he sits on every single jury, all of them, and of course has opinions.
Can
Needless to say.
No,
Yeah.
but I think that's really special.
see it on all of
I don't know a school that does that, because I know some of the people he brings he absolutely disagrees with, but he respects the ideas of them.
And Bob, I think you surprised people with that approach, right?
Yeah,
mean,
I don't know why they were surprised. I mean, that was their fault, not mine. I mean, I've always had that position. And of course, it's Yale's position in terms of architecture. It's never been, well, let's say IIT, which has
a very
strict,
Misesian.
straight ahead. Mies is still alive there. It's like at UVA, they still talk about Mr. Jefferson. At IIT, Mies is just down at the men's room, and he'll be back in a minute.
Well, one of the best.
But Yale has always been very eclectic because it's a college and it's an architecture school in a humanistic setting, and that's not a technical school.
But you've described yourself as a modern traditionalist. I think people thought that was what you would bring to Yale, right?
Yes, but I brought other things together, and the mix is more interesting. And I've changed over the 15 years, I'm sure, a lot.
But I think
And the fun of being in education is you learn. You learn from your students, but if you also bring people like Frank and Stanley or Zaha or Leon Creer, I mean, we've had some sort of slightly scary dinner parties.
I was gonna
needless
say,
to
that
a lot
he
of
fit.
people together, but it's pretty amazing.
One of the best juries I've ever been on was the one with Leon Creer. And he doesn't like my work at all. And he let me be on his jury because of you.
With a little encouragement from the dean, yes.
Very good. We only have about a couple of minutes. I was also pondering, I want to kind of go back to maybe lighter subjects, but I was pondering the names. So you know, Frank, we know you've changed your name at some point in your life. You started using the AM, and you know, Stanley memorably said he talked about you before you became Robert A.M. Stern. Stanley does this a lot. But did you know that Stanley has a nom de plume?
I sort of do, but I can't remember it.
Morris Lesser.
Oh, yes.
Yes, you remember Morris Lesser.
Morris Lesser.
Can you tell us who Morris Lesser is?
Morris Lesser, there was an exhibition that was funded by the Graham Foundation, which had 3 architects from the East, 3 from the Middle West, and 3 from the West Coast. And my first teaching job, visiting critic at Yale, was when Cesar Pelli was the dean. And we're sitting at a coffee shop, and he was stunned by the catalog and this article by Morris Lesser. Said, who is Morris Lesser?
So in the catalog is an article by Morris Lesser.
Authored by Morris Lesser. Morris Lesser is more is less, sir. C'est moi. Yes, that's true.
You didn't get that?
You didn't know that.
So you have a name change in your career as well.
Lucky.
Well, it's a better name than I had when I was a kid, let's put it that way.
What was that name?
Teapot Tigerman,
Really?
because I was shaped like this.
Well, he might have been shaped like that, but you were also quite an athlete.
That was after I shed all the poundage.
Okay. Stanley was the captain of the state champion fencing team
Wow.
at Senn High School? Mm-hmm. At Senn High School.
Who knew that you'd actually read all that crap? It's amazing.
Somebody had to.
I guess.
I'm just trying to, we've got only about a minute left here, right? Jennifer, we have about a minute before we do. We're going to open this up to Q&A if people are so inclined. So I've got to kind of consolidate what my plan was. I think we should just do the Q&A now.
Okay, let's do it.
Are we ready for that?
We are ready.
Okay, right, because I think that we should leave time for that.
Can we
Yeah,
open
turn
the
the
lights?
lights.
Yeah,
so
can we
see
turn
them?
on the lights? We wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to pose some questions, and I think let's make sure you do. So if you have a question,
We've got people with microphones right here.
There's a lady right down front who has a question.
This is just a follow-up on what you were talking about.
I'll repeat the question, don't worry. Go ahead.
Is it true that you were voted the world's most beautiful baby at the World's Fair?
So, the question is it true he won a baby beauty contest at the World's Fair of 1933?
Yes.
I guess truth is stranger than fiction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
I guess a lot of people read that autobiography.
Thank you, Celia, for reminding us of that.
Do we
So I
another-
have a question up here. Wondering, I guess for each of you, so Mr. Stern, if you had settled in Los Angeles, and Mr. Gehry, if you had settled in Chicago, and maybe Stanley in New York, can you imagine how your architecture might have been different? Maybe a question for each of you.
What a nightmare.
A hard question. I mean,
It's a very hard question.
Well,
Because
in-
so much of what I think in the 3 of our lives is generated by the environment. It's not by some gene pool. It's the pressures and the opportunities.
But Chicago's the best architectural city.
No, but it's interesting. I mean, young people sometimes ask me, where should I go after they graduate? Where should I go? And my answer is always home. So, okay, Frank was from Canada, but he migrated to LA and he stayed and stayed. He didn't go. Bob's from New York. I actually was born, as was Margaret, in Chicago. So I think that has an impact on what you do and the forces around you, whether it was Mies for me or whatever it was. Certainly George Howe had a huge impact on you as a younger man, no question about it. And I think that Victor Gruen at some level had a big impact on you.
Yeah, but L.A. architecture was few and far between, so you had to really squirrel around to find it. So it wasn't in your face like here.
Well, here, I mean, I remember I gave a lecture The last lecture I gave at the American Academy in Rome, somebody asked the question, you seem to have an affinity between your being from Chicago and your being here in Rome. I said, well, one answer is Chicago is the most modern city on earth, and Rome is all the rest. I mean, literally.
Wow, now you've laid down a challenge here.
Well, it's true. Think about Rome.
But I think Stanley's right about the environmental thing. If you're a good architect, you dig into where you are and you participate in the culture, and you add to the culture if you're lucky, and maybe even slightly adjust the culture. So you go where you feel where your roots are, or where you feel you can put down roots. However, when students ask me at Yale where they should go, I tell them to go to New York. Although certain alumni who give money to Yale have told me to stop saying that. But the reason, because it's the biggest concentration of architects and art people in the country at this moment. L.A., when Frank went there, was, as he said, it was a kind of desert. It's not a desert anymore. It's an oasis in a desert.
No, but it did. You weren't coming from nowhere. People that looked at the West Coast work, even the artists and the architects, didn't understand it because it was coming from nowhere for people that lived in Chicago or New York, living in an urban environment. It just didn't make sense. But if you were there in the trenches, they were building wood stick houses by the hundreds, by the thousands. The workmanship was crappy.
But even when I was...
There was nobody really, the clients were not, there weren't any clients to do anything.
But in our generation, when Stanley and I left school and went to our professional ways, I think coming to Chicago was the hardest place to come. Because Mies was the 10-ton gorilla.
Right.
And then there was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, who in our generation we called Three Blind Mies. And everybody was, and then you had the heritage of Wright and Sullivan and the idea that Chicago had two major periods that were of incomparable importance in the history of architecture. And it was hard to find your place. I think Stanley's rambunctious, challenging, sometimes slightly off-the-wall events that he staged, things that he said, the Mies building, the Crown Hall sinking into the Lake Michigan.
Was because it's called Titanic. It's Lake Michigan with Crown Hall.
I think the Art Institute owns that drawing now.
They do.
Yep. It was one of the most important drawings of the middle of the 60s and 70s. When 70 you did it. But anyhow, he had to do that to clear a space.
Yeah.
And the Chicago 7.
Was
the
to clear
Chicago
space.
7.
Was to make room for us. Because
You had to
it
make
was
room.
a Mies town. There's no question.
In New York, it's much more fluid. It's more cosmopolitan. People come from Europe and so forth. Eisenman had his own institute and all kinds of things. And in L.A., I think finally, when Frank began to figure out what he really wanted to do as an architect, he began to set an agenda where other younger architects around him could have a conversation, could have a sense of place there. But Chicago's a tough town for a young architect, in my opinion, because there's so much here.
Because I came from this place. When I was finishing up at Yale, where I worked for Paul Rudolph at night for both of the years I was there, as I got my master's degree, Paul, for whom I was working at the time, offered me a job. And I said, Mr. Rudolph, you see that old tired Falcon station wagon with its motor running, and my wife and then wife and my son were in it? I said, I got to go back to Chicago. I can't stand it anymore. Because Yale was very, very hard, in my view. It was a tough time under Rudolph. And I knew I had to come back, because this was the place. This was the challenge. This was my home. And this was, if you do go home, no matter from what side of the tracks you initially came, you ultimately end up in very good shape, because cities have an interesting institutional memory. They know loyalty. They understand it. And loyalty is what this is all about, the three of us. So I understood that, and I had to come home. There's no question.
I think we're going to run out of time. Why don't we have And thank you, by the way, all three of you for that. We have one. I think we have time for one more. Is that right, Jennifer? Yeah, one more. There's a gentleman right in the middle there.
As Asia takes over the economic helm from the West, or at least, carries on the torch and becomes sort of the center of newer architectural development, how do you foresee that evolving? Up to this point, I think much of Asia has looked towards the West for its cues and influence in architecture. Does that change at some point? Does it become uniquely Asian, or is it no longer relevant? Is it just sort of the development of architecture? It's a smaller world, and it's sort of a ubiquitous evolution.
I'll take a stab at that. I think eventually, of course, China will develop. Talented people in China will emerge in the architectural profession and will make major contributions, and the balance of power, if you will readjust. Just as in the 19th century, America began to slowly emerge as an important place for architecture with Sullivan and Wright, McKimby and White and others, garnering attention in Europe, which previously had paid no attention. H.H. Richardson previously paid no attention. But in China, there still is a problem for young architects training. It's so technical. The mindset of the way Chinese architects are taught is in a highly technical setting, and that will have to change to unleash the power, I think, the talent that's in that great, huge mass of people in that country. And I watch that fairly carefully, and I think it's really a problem, which will solve itself, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. We still have in the West a much more creative, fluid, risk-taking approach to the design of buildings.
But the thing that's different now is technology, right? So globalization is serious. That the Chinese artists are very influenced by the West. You see a lot of Warhol influence, and Rauschenberg, and African artists, Picasso. I love to say this. Picasso was influenced by Africa, and African artists are influenced by Picasso. So there's so much interchange that it's starting to have a much different look than in the past. I think we're looking at something totally new.
But that's also true now in Chicago. In a post-Miesian era, which is now much more fluid and much more open to many things. And so the young talent in Chicago, the next generation, the John Ronins and Jeannie Gangs, Jeannie I think is out there tonight, and others, are not entirely driven by that Miesian authority. So when those of us, and some of them are in the room tonight, from the Chicago 7, put it together and had an event at which you both were there at the Graham Foundation, it was to make a place for ourselves, for sure, but it was to open up the city, to try to open it up to dialogue and different ways of thinking, not just the one right overarching way that was when I came back from New Haven. We wanted to make that open. Certainly we wanted a place for ourselves at the table, make no mistake. But we also were interested in that dialogue, and so Chicago has changed. It no longer is a one overarching way to see things, and it is much more cosmopolitan than it was.
Absolutely.
But to answer the question, Bob, you said it will change at some point, this shift to Asia. I mean, what happens then? Or Frank, or
you mean, will we be out of jobs
here?
No, I don't think so. I think that, Americans, like New York architects, were very provincial. When foreign architects, Europeans, began to build in New York, it's ridiculous. We should be open to people of talent from wherever. And
except in France.
That's because you just had a very bad experience.
They won't let you in.
Really?
The French are their own thing, it's true. But I think that there'll be plenty of room for all of us.
Yeah, so it becomes just a world community of,
Exactly.
of architecture.
Excuse me.
Well, I think that's all we have time for at this moment. So first of all, I just want to thank all three of our architects. And I will say to Bob and to Frank, because I had some conversations with Stanley as we prepared for this, I know how much it means to him personally that you two are on this stage tonight and that you've come to Chicago to do this. And we in the Architecture and Design Society really thank you for that. It's just tremendous. So I have a very short little bit of business to do, and then we can go on. So what will happen next, after I say a few more things, is we will go out that way, we will turn that way. There'll be lots of people to lead you, but we're going to go into the modern wing, Renzo Piano's modern wing. And
What's his name?
Piano. And from which you actually get a great view of the Pritzker Pavilion, by the way. I interviewed Renzo Piano a few years ago, and we were up on the second floor of the modern wing. And I don't know if this is true or not, I don't know if you remember this or not, but he said he looked out from the second floor at Millennium Park, and there is the Pritzker Pavilion by Frank Gehry, and he whipped out his cell phone and said, Frank, he called you. He said, Frank, I just gave you a great gift. He claims he said that.
So
Right.
the reason he got to that spot was I was giving a talk earlier, and Renzo was up in the balcony. He wasn't in this room. I don't know where it was. And he was hired to do the museum over the tracks. And I challenged him. I said, Renzo, come and get me. Come on out here.
So it's...
Beware of Greeks bearing gifts.
the dialectic, as Stanley likes to call it.
Yes, of course.
And then we're going to have about an hour of conversation, cocktails, and over there in the modern wing, and then dinner will be served.